Hello everyone, I'm Caitlin Teeter, and on today's Teeter Tales, I'm going to be doing a review of All Creatures Great and Small by James Herriot, the pen name of James Alfred White. This book is a partially fictitious account of Herriot's time as a veterinarian in rural England. I won't be going into spoilers for this book, and as always, you can find chapters in the description. So let's go ahead and get started. All Creatures Great and Small is narrated by Herriot himself, and he begins the story with him graduating vet school and coming to work in Yorkshire as a veterinarian. While it does have a loose, overarching narrative, the book mostly entails individual stories about Herriot's time working as a vet. Stories can range from intense scenarios of trying to save a prized animal to comedic stories like dealing with a rich woman's pampered dog. The book covers the first several years of Herriot's time in Yorkshire. The reader becomes both acquainted with Herriot's work and those most important in his life. Something to keep in mind while reading this book is that the stories are largely based upon Herriot's real-life experiences, albeit embellished for the story. As such, I wouldn't say that this is a nonfiction work, but it's definitely not pure fiction either. One of the best ways I can describe this book is charming. Much of that comes down to the writing. Herriot's style manages to be both down to earth and very engaging. He explains situations with great detail while still taking time to include amusing commentary on those around him. His voice is very clear and distinct throughout this novel. Not only does the writing capture the physical details of being a vet, but there are also moments where he takes time to stop and consider the deeper impact of these scenes, such as when a beloved pet has to be put down. This is one of those books that when you think back on it, you can't help but think about the way it was written, not just the words themselves. And I mean that in the best way possible. All Creatures, Great and Small is full of characters that can range from level-headed to comedic caricatures, and Harriet tackles all of these character types very well. Harriet himself works as the narrator or character within the story as he's reliable enough that you can reasonably trust his account of the scenes, but he still has his own personality and desires. This makes for an engaging protagonist that the reader is willing to spend the full novel with. The supporting characters add a lot of flair to this story. Whether it's the absurd antics of Harriet's boss Siegfried, or Siegfried's younger and problem-causing brother Tristan, the characters in the book add much comedy and personality to the stories they inhabit. Though I loved the stories of Harriet's various veterinarian exploits, I found myself enjoying the stories of Siegfried's forgetfulness, Harriet's terrible courting, and Mrs. Pumphrey's oblivious doting on Tricky just as much. Even the farmers who Harriet does work for are fun characters. Some are grumbling and it's easy to dislike them along with Harriet, and others are delightfully ignorant to anything outside their area of expertise. All these elements add up to create a book that does a wonderful job of building a sense of place and community through its characters. Since this book is primarily made up of individual stories, there's not much of a reason for me to talk about the plot, but I will take a moment to talk about the pacing. This is the sort of book that really has the potential to drag on. A few veterinarian stories might entertain for a while, but they can't maintain the reader's interest forever. That's why Harriet's use of various types of narratives works so well in this novel. Harriet doesn't get bogged down in one type of story for very long. The book makes a habit of cycling through different storylines, some more focused on Harriet's practice, and others more focused on his private life. This meant I was always interested and never felt like the book was running on too long. I did feel that things started to pick up and time started to progress faster towards the end of this book, but that made sense because it serves as a way to transition Harriet into a new stage of his life as the bookend for this narrative. I would not describe this book as raunchy or adult by any means, but there is actually a fair bit of content to discuss. First and foremost, this book is about a veterinarian. As such, there is a lot of discussion about the suffering and death of animals. That's not to say that this book is cruel to animals. Herriot clearly cares a great deal about them and does his best to give them good and proper care, but that doesn't mean animals won't suffer or sometimes die. Since the book is focused on his vet practice, Herriot goes into great detail describing the wounds, illnesses, and treatments that animals are given. This also means that there will be scenes where he's helping cows give birth, treating sores, or even putting an animal down on the occasion. None of this is done for shock value, but these scenes are very detailed. This isn't a book for the squeamish or faint of heart. Herriot describes things as a veterinarian, which means that they are accurate, detailed, and often gross. The next big concern would probably be the language. While the swearing in this book isn't excessive, it does pop up in flurries where the profanity flies. Mostly, this comes from irate farmers or an enraged Siegfried. There's a good amount of mild profanity tossed around, though the occasional stronger profanities, like the S word, will pop up. I'll also point out that Jesus' name is used as a swear word a few times, and I believe God was occasionally paired with the D word. There's obviously going to be sexual content in a book about a veterinarian, as there's discussions of animals mating. There are also stories that deal with the reproductive parts of animals being treated, or in some cases removed. As for human sexual content, there's not much beyond dating, Harriet noting a woman to be attractive, or some kissing and cuddling. There is some smoking and drinking present in this book, but not a lot. There were just a few chapters that focused on Harriet or others getting drunk and then regretting it after the fact. I actually listened to the audiobook of All Creatures Great and Small while in the final semester of university. It was a strange experience to be listening to this book while taking classes like comparative vertebrate anatomy. So many of the stories in this book, which was originally published in 1972, revolved around what I was learning in the classroom, or the stories gave me a sense of deja vu from the stories I was hearing about in class. From that perspective, this is an excellent book, which, while heavily fictitious, still captures much of the real principles behind veterinarian work in a way that has captivated readers for decades. In a sense, this is a book that combines my two loves. It has science, but it still tells an engaging story and manages to build a real sense of community in the midst of all of that vet work. I had this book recommended to me by both friends and family, none of whom have any background in veterinary study. I myself only studied biology and don't have any background in veterinary practice specifically. As such, I can say with confidence that this book is one that not only appeals to those with scientific interests, but to readers in general. The way Harriet works in his love for animals, the beauty of the English countryside, and the triumphs and challenges of working with real people is admirable. This is a book that is well written and well informed, something that is lacking in a lot of fiction. I would highly recommend this book to anyone who can handle its descriptions of veterinary practice. I hope you'll consider reading or listening to this book and that you enjoyed my review. Thanks for watching. Bye!